Is Canada's housing market about to surge again? And could Lethbridge be an outlier in a wave of rising prices? Let's break down what might lie ahead in 2025's real estate market in Canada, and then we're going to see how that'll affect us right here in Lethbridge. What's up, guys? My name's Kurtis Hawkins, and I'm a realtor located right here in Lethbridge, Alberta. And today, the first thing I'm going to do is go over what's happening in the Canadian real estate market as a whole. And then from there, I'm going to dive deep into the Lethbridge market and see how the Canadian market and the federal government's new policies and even the Bank of Canada's interest rate decisions will impact the Lethbridge market in 2025. And the reason I want to do this is because the Lethbridge market has almost been the exact opposite of what's been happening in the Canadian market, which is very interesting, and my predictions might sound a bit crazy and maybe even a little bit unbelievable. So let's get into it. First, looking at a recent article from CREA, which is the Canadian Real Estate Association, they are basically predicting that the Canadian market will be heating up in 2025. They're predicting that with these new rate cuts, especially the Bank of Canada's previous 0.5% cut, will bring back buyers into the market. You see, in 2023 and 2024, the most popular mortgage was a 3-year fixed mortgage. And the reason for that is that in 2024, we saw the height of the interest rate peaks, and we slowly started to see them decline from there. However, everyone was predicting rates to keep dropping even further over the next few years. So instead of locking in for that traditional 5-year fixed rate and locking into what could have been a high 4 or 5% rate for the next 5 years, most people just opted for a 3-year fixed mortgage, betting on the interest rates continuing to fall so that when the renewal comes, you don't have to be locked in for 5 years. You can only be locked in for 3. Then when you go to renew, hopefully interest rates would be closer to 2.5% or 3%. 2.5% is probably a bit of a stretch, but I think 3% is pretty reasonable. I even did the same thing on my last revenue property. I only locked in for 3 years, betting that interest rates would come down. And what CREA has outlined is that consumers have experienced these smaller rate cuts, but many of the buyers who were planning on a 3-year fixed rate have kind of said, you know what? Prices are starting to come down. Interest rates are already starting to come down. So why don't I just wait it out and see if both prices and interest rates fall even further? Now, you might be asking, if those interest rates are falling, why are home prices also falling too? I mean, back in 2020 during the pandemic, the interest rates dropped and the housing prices went crazy. So why aren't we seeing the same thing now across Canada? And the reason for that is in the current market, sellers out there saw these interest rates dropping initially, and with some small drops of 0.25% earlier this year, these sellers said, perfect, interest rates are coming down. These buyers are going to be out there. I better get my home on the market now because these buyers are going to be more interested with these lower rate cuts. But the exact opposite sort of happened. People put their house in the market expecting these buyers to be there, and they just weren't. Like I said, they're all waiting on the sideline, waiting for even further interest rates drops to come. And inevitably, supply and demand does what it does. So when there's a whole bunch of inventory on the market and no buyers, those prices start to soften. Now, what does all this mean? And what's it going to do to the market in Canada in 2025? Well, as we just saw from the Bank of Canada's latest drop of 50 basis points, CREA and most of the Canadian banks are predicting that this could be enough to get buyers back into the market, and we'll start to see those home prices back up on the rise again. Now, this is a bit of a double-edged sword here. So if you're a buyer that's been waiting on those sidelines like I talked about, but you do agree with CREA's analysis and the big 5 banks in Canada, and you believe that buyers are going to be entering the market with lower rates, then now is probably the time to jump back into the market before the big rush of buyers come, especially in the springtime. Because if all these predictions are correct, this could be the bottom of the market. Okay, so now that we've covered what happened in the market, and I've talked a little bit about what we could see in 2025 in the Canadian real estate market as a whole, let's jump into the Lethbridge market and see how all of this could affect Lethbridge. Okay, now before I get really specific, I do need to bring up some Canada-wide stats, and then I'll jump into Lethbridge. So Canada-wide, the average home prices decreased about 3.7% in 2023, and it remained pretty flat in 2024 with an increase of just 0.9% in 2024. However, in Lethbridge in 2023, we saw a 0.5% decrease, and in 2024, we saw a whopping 11.8% increase in the average home price. So the question is, why is Lethbridge, Alberta, and a city of just 100,000 people such an outlier? And Why has the Lethbridge house prices gone up so much in value over the last year, where the rest of Canada has remained pretty flat and in some cases decreased? Well, a big reason for that, in my opinion, is that the average home price in Lethbridge is still very affordable when you compare it to the rest of Canada. Right now in Lethbridge, our average home price sits at $378,000, and that's been a big draw for a ton of interprovincial immigration to Lethbridge. And historically speaking, Lethbridge has always had a very stable housing market. In the past 10 years, Lethbridge has only seen 2 years where the prices have actually decreased in price, and that was back in 2015, where the average home price dropped by literally $20, which is obviously pretty negligible. And the other was actually in 2013, when the average home price dropped about $1,800. Again, very negligible, just a 0.5% decrease. Again, looking back on the last 10 years, with all the boom and bust cycles in the economy that's happened, Lethbridge has always held very steady, and it's reasonable to see that the housing market here has still remained solid. Plus, when you add 5,000 additional people to our population from mostly places like BC and Ontario, you can see how prices have driven up dramatically over the last year. So what does this mean for Lethbridge in 2025? Well, since 2022, Lethbridge has seen the lowest amount of listings in the past 10 years. And this year in 2024, we have seen the lowest probably ever, which is the biggest reason for our big increase in prices. And the really interesting thing here is, though we've seen the lowest amount of listings, we've also seen the highest amount of sales on record, going back to all the way in 2021 and 2022. However, in the past 2 years, in 2023 and 2024, we didn't see as much sales as we did in the 2 previous years, but still significantly more than average. So speaking of that supply and demand again that we talked about earlier, when there's less homes available and even more buyers than ever, prices, of course, are going to be on the rise. Okay, so why are there no sellers in Lethbridge? Why does nobody want to list? Well, if you're a seller, please let me know down in the comments, because I've asked this question on a previous video and I didn't get any sellers replying down there. So please, if you are a seller, please let me know why you haven't listed yet. But the reason I think many sellers over the past 2 years haven't listed is because in 2021 and 2022, like I just showed you, the majority of sales in Lethbridge that's ever happened were in those 2 years. So with the majority of sales happening in Lethbridge in those 2 years, there have been a ton of buyers that are locked into an interest rate of high 1% mortgage payments or even low 2s. And they're locked in for the next 5 years. And of course, they're not going to want to break that mortgage of 2% or less and start a new mortgage of 4 or even 5% at the height of things. Now, looking forward in 2025, I'm getting to my predictions, so just hold on there. Are these homeowners that bought in 2021 and 2022 going to be ready to list and sell and bring some inventory back into the market? My guess is probably not, but maybe. Since we've seen those big recent rate cuts like I've been talking about, the best mortgage rate that I've seen right now has been about 3.99%. So for those sellers who have outgrown their house or need to downsize, maybe this lower interest rate cut combined with their increase in home price will entice some more sellers to list, because they're not going from that spread of 1 to 5%, maybe 1 to a high 3% is enough to do it. I don't know. Now, I do think winter will slow down the market a bit here in Lethbridge, as it usually does, because our market is very tied to the seasons, and you can see that every year. But come springtime, I do predict that we're going to see more listings than we've seen in the last 2 years, but we aren't going to be breaking any listing records, that's for sure. And with the interest rates dropping even further, I do think that we're going to see more buyers entering the market, which is crazy to think of already, because we're at the highest points that we've ever seen in history for our number of sales. So the big question is, are we going to have more out-of-town buyers moving to Lethbridge, and will Lethbridge continue to grow in population? Well, I do think that in other major cities, like places like Toronto and Vancouver, will reevaluate if jumping into another crazy housing market where they're from is worth it. Or perhaps they're going to continue to do what so many others have already and relocate to cheaper areas of the country like Lethbridge. I mean, in 2023, Alberta's population grew by 173,000 people. And in 2024, Alberta grew again by 204,000 people. And within the next 5 years, it's predicted that Alberta will add another 1 million new residents, which is kind of crazy and a little bit overwhelming. So if this population increase still continues next year, and unless we see record-breaking listings at the same time, my prediction is that home prices will continue to increase and this market is going to remain very competitive in 2025. Now, I'm also predicting right now that we're going to see even more sales than what we saw in 2023 and in 2024. And I will say that I do think that we will see slightly more listings than what we've had this year, because honestly, I just can't see how we could have any less. It's crazy. It's pretty crazy out there. And again, I have no data to back up that we're going to see more listings than last year, but again, it just doesn't make sense to me how we could have even less than we've already had. It's just insane. So what does this mean if you're a buyer that's going to be entering the Lethbridge market in 2025? Well, if you're one of those buyers that's waiting for those interest rates to keep dropping even further, my advice would be to put off waiting and take what you can get in terms of an interest rate now. Or if you're confident that those interest rates will continue to come down, then take that variable rate and lock in later. Because like I mentioned with that double-edged sword, when interest rates keep dropping down, more buyers are going to enter the market and prices are going to go up. So by waiting on the sidelines and waiting for a lower interest rate, you're inevitably going to be waiting for those house prices to go up as well. So what does this mean if you're a seller in Lethbridge? Well, honestly, this could be the best time to sell in Lethbridge's history. As I just showed you with those stats, we have record low listings, which means no inventory, and we have record high buyers, which means that you're going to be able to make money on your home, at least if you bought it within the last 2 or 3 years, especially even longer than that. And if it's marketed to the max and it's priced appropriately, you could sell your home pretty quickly. But there is an asterisk here. If you think your home is in the 450 range or less, you could have an even bigger advantage, because those are the prices that are seeing the biggest lack of inventory and the biggest amount of interest. Now, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope my predictions are correct, but of course I don't have a crystal ball and I don't actually know. And I know everybody else has their own opinion. So if you do have an opinion and you think you know what's going to happen in the market come 2025, please leave them in the comments down below. And again, if you guys like this video, be sure to hit the like button down here. You can also hit the subscribe button if you want to keep seeing these. And there's a whole playlist right here of more videos just like this. All of my information is located down below. Thank you guys so much for watching again, and we'll see you guys in the next video.